The wind in the Wyoming Territory did not simply blow, it scoured. It came down from the high snow-streaked peaks of the distant mountains, gathering speed across miles of gray sagebrush and cracked earth until it hit the town of Bitter Creek like a physical blow. It rattled the loose boards of the livery, stripped the whitewash from the church steeple, and drove grit into the very skin of the people who were stubborn enough to live there. It was the late 1880s, and the territory was a place that promised freedom to some and acted as a prison to others. For Lila Ward. The wind was just one more thing that tried to wear her down, one more heavy hand pressing against her back. Lila stood on the porch of the main house of the Ward Ranch, watching the dust devil dance across the yard. She was 25 years old, though there were days she felt closer to 50. To the town of Bitter Creek, she was the fortunate wife of Charles Ward, a man who owned 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, a man who sat in the front pew of the church every Sunday, a man whose contributions kept the schoolhouse painted and the preacher fed. She was the envy of the unmarried women and the standard by which the matrons judged their daughters-in-law. Lila adjusted the high lace collar of her dress, her fingers lingering over the tender spot just beneath her collarbone. The bruise there was yellowing now, fading into a dull, sickly green that she could almost convince herself never happened. Charles did not like it when she stood on the porch for too long. He said it looked idle. He said a woman of her standing should be managing the household, not staring at the horizon like a lost calf. The door behind her opened, and the heavy thud of boots announced him. Lila did not flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching only drew his attention, like a wolf drawn to a limping deer. "The wind is picking up," Charles said. His voice was a rich baritone, the kind of voice that sounded comforting when he read the Psalms on Sunday morning. "You should be inside, Lila. The dust will ruin your complexion." "I was just watching the hands bring the herd in," Lila said, turning to face him. She kept her hands clasped demurely in front of her, hiding the tremor that sometimes started in her fingers when he was near. Charles smiled. It was a smile that showed his teeth, but never reached his eyes. "They are rough men. Lila, not fit for your eyes. Come inside. I have asked you to review the supply ledger for the winter." He reached out and took her arm. To an observer, it would have looked like a gesture of affection, a husband guiding his wife. But Lila felt the pressure of his fingers, the digging of his thumb into the soft flesh of her upper arm. It was a warning. It was a leash. "Yes, Charles," she said softly. "That is a good wife," he whispered, leaning close enough that she could smell the peppermint he sucked on to mask the scent of tobacco. Obedience is the jewel of a woman's spirit. Inside the house, the air was still and smelled of beeswax and roast beef. It was a beautiful prison. Lila sat at the heavy oak desk and opened the ledger, but the numbers swam before her eyes. She had been good at sums once, before she came west, back in Ohio. She had dreamed of being a schoolteacher. She had wanted to teach children to read, to open up the world for them. Or perhaps she would have run a small dry goods shop, smelling of cinnamon and calico, earning her own coins and spending them as she pleased. But her father had been a practical man with 4 daughters and a failing farm. When Charles Ward came east looking for a wife to grace his Wyoming empire, Lila's father had seen a solution. "He is a good man," her father had said, ignoring the coldness in Charles's eyes. "He has land. You will never want for anything." He had been wrong. Lila wanted for everything. She wanted breath. She wanted kindness. She wanted to walk out the front door and keep walking until the mountains swallowed her whole. Life in Bitter Creek ground on with the relentless turning of the seasons. The town was a collection of false-fronted buildings clinging to the edge of the plains, dusty in summer and frozen iron-hard in winter. Women with red, chapped hands hung laundry on lines that whipped in the gale, fighting to keep the dust out of the sheets. Men rode out before the sun crested the horizon, smelling of horse sweat and coal oil, their face hardening into leather masks. In this world, Charles Ward was a king. He walked down the boardwalk, and men tipped their hats. He spoke at the town council meetings, and people listened. He was generous with his money when people were watching. If Lila seemed quiet, if she startled when a door slammed, the townsfolk smiled pityingly. "She is delicate," the mayor's wife would say. "High-strung, some women just aren't built for the West. It is a blessing she has a strong man like Mr. Ward to look after her." Lila had no friends among the respectable women of the town. They were too busy judging the polish on her silver or the trim on her bonnet. Her only moments of respite came when she could slip away to the edges of the town, to the places where the polite society of Bitter Creek did not look too closely. Mrs. Chang ran the laundry at the far end of Main Street, a small shack that smelled perpetually of steam and lye soap. Mrs. Chang was a widow, a tiny woman with eyes as sharp as obsidian. She spoke little English to the customers who threw their dirty shirts on her counter. But with Lila, she had a quiet understanding. One Tuesday, Lila brought a bundle of Charles's shirts. "Starch on the collars," Lila said, her voice dull. "He likes them very stiff." Mrs. Chang took the bundle. She looked at Lila's wrist, where the sleeve of her dress had pulled back slightly to reveal a fresh purple mark. Charles had squeezed too hard when she had dropped a fork at dinner 2 nights ago. Mrs. Chang did not gasp. She did not ask what happened. She simply reached out and adjusted Lila's sleeve, pulling it down to cover the bruise. "Tea, Mrs. Chang said. It was not a question. She led Lila to the back of the shop, where a small kettle boiled on a cast-iron stove. They sat on crates, sipping bitter tea while the steam swirled around them. "Man is like Riverstone," Mrs. Chang said, staring into her cup. "Hard, cold. Water must flow around, or water gets trapped and goes bad." "I feel like I am drowning," Lila whispered. It was the first time she had said it aloud. Mrs. Chang nodded. "Then you must learn to swim, or you must get out of the water." Then there was Esther. Esther worked at the livery stable, mucking out stalls and hauling water. She was half Lakota and half white, belonging to neither world fully. The town tolerated her because she was good with horses, better than any man in the county, but they did not invite her into their parlors. Lila met her when Charles's carriage horse threw a shoe. While the blacksmith worked, Lila stood near the corral, watching Esther gentle a nervous colt. Esther moved with a fluid grace, her voice a low hum that seemed to settle the animal's fear. "You have a way with them," Lila said. Esther looked up, wiping her hands on her trousers. Her face was guarded. "Horses are honest, Mrs. Ward. They tell you when they are scared. They tell you when they are mad. People lie. Horses don't." "I suppose that is true," Lila said. She looked at the colt, now resting its head on Esther's shoulder. "I wish I could be that brave." "It ain't bravery," Esther said, spitting into the dust. "It is just knowing that if you show fear, you get kicked, you stand your ground, or you get crushed." Lila took those words home with her, turning them over in her mind like polished stones. It was in late November when the stories about Cole Tanner began to drift through Bitter Creek. They came in with the freighters and the drifters, whispered over whiskey in the saloon and coffee in the general store. They said he was a tall man, lean as a whipcord, with a scar running along his jawline that looked like it had been carved by a knife. They said he had a gun hand faster than a striking rattlesnake. Some claimed he had killed a man in a saloon fight down in Texas. Others whispered he used to ride with a gang of outlaws before turning on them. "He is a bad sort," Charles declared one evening at dinner, slicing his steak with precise, surgical movements. "I saw him at the livery today. A drifter, eyes like a wolf. I told the sheriff we should not let his kind linger in Bitter Creek. They bring nothing but trouble and sin." Lila said nothing, keeping her eyes on her plate, but she felt a strange curiosity. A man who lived outside the rules, a man who did not care what the deacon thought. She saw him 2 days later. The wind was howling, kicking up grit that stung the eyes. Lila was walking out of the general store, clutching a parcel of thread and needles against her chest. A young boy, the son of the town baker, was running ahead of his mother, laughing as he chased a tumbling weed. The boy tripped over a loose board in the boardwalk. He fell hard, his small bundle of stick candy scattering into the muddy street. The boy began to cry. A high, thin sound in the wind. The baker's wife was too far back, laden with packages. But a man stepped out of the shadows of the saloon porch. It was him, Cole Tanner. He was tall, wearing a long duster coat that had seen better days. The leather cracked and stained with trail dust. His hat was pulled low, but Lila saw the jagged white line of the scar on his jaw. Most of the men in Bitter Creek would have ignored the crying child or barked at him to get up. Cole Tanner stepped off the boardwalk into the mud. He crouched down, his movements surprisingly fluid for a big man. He gathered the scattered candy, wiping the mud off the sticks with a gloved hand. He held them out to the boy. "Easy now, son," he said. His voice was low, rough like gravel, but there was no anger in it. "No harm done. Dry your eyes." The boy stopped crying, looking up at the scarred man with wide eyes. He took the candy. Cole stood up. As he turned, he saw Lila standing there, watching him. For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. The wind faded into a dull roar. Cole tilted his head slightly, peering at her from under the brim of his hat. His eyes were not dead like Charles's. They were a piercing, clear gray, like a winter sky. There was a hardness in them. Yes, the look of a man who has seen death, but there was also something else. A quietness, a recognition. He did not look at her dress or her bonnet. He looked at her face. He looked at the tension in her jaw and the fear she carried in her shoulders. It felt as though he could see the bruises beneath the high lace collar. He reached up and touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am," he said softly. Lila felt a jolt go through her chest, sharp and terrifying. It was the first time in 5 years a man had looked at her with gentle eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. Cole nodded once, then turned and walked away, his spurs jingling softly in the silence between gusts of wind. That night, the devil came to the Ward Ranch. Charles had been in town. He had heard something. Or perhaps he had seen the way Lila stood on the boardwalk for 10 seconds too long. It did not take much to light the fuse of his paranoia. He came home smelling of cold air and righteous indignation. Dinner was a silent affair, the only sound the scraping of silverware on china. Lila could feel the pressure building in the room, heavy as the air before a thunderstorm. "I heard you were at the store today," Charles said finally, laying down his fork. "I needed thread," Lila said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "Did you speak to anyone?" "Only Mr. Henderson at the counter." Charles stared at her. His eyes were flat, like a shark's. "I heard you saw that drifter, that Tanner man. I saw him help a child who fell," Lila stammered. "That is all." "And did you speak to him?" Charles's voice dropped to a whisper, a sound far more terrifying than a shout. "No, Charles, I swear it." Charles stood up. He walked around the table slowly. Lila stopped breathing. He placed his hands on the back of her chair. "A wife's reputation is like glass. Lila," he said, "once cracked, it can never be mended. You stood there and looked at a man who is a killer, a man who is filth. What does that say about you? Does it say you are a godly woman? Or does it say you have a wandering eye, an ungrateful heart?" "I was just looking," Lila whispered. "Ungrateful," Charles hissed. He grabbed the back of her hair. Yanking her head back, Lila cried out, clutching the edge of the table. "I give you a home. I give you a name. And you look at trash in the street like a common harlot." He slammed her head forward, not hard enough to knock her out, but hard enough to make stars dance in her vision. "Go to your room," he commanded. "Pray for a clean heart. If I hear one more whisper, Lila, just one, I will teach you a lesson you will carry to your grave." Lila fled up the stairs, her breath coming in jagged gasps. She locked the door, though she knew the lock was flimsy and Charles had the key. She sat on the edge of the bed, shaking. The terror was there, familiar and cold, but beneath it, something new was blooming. A realization. She saw the years stretching out before her. 10 years, 20, 30. She saw herself growing smaller and smaller until she disappeared entirely. She saw the day when his hand would not stop, when the lesson would end with her at the bottom of the stairs or buried in the churchyard under a stone that praised her obedience. "I will die here," she thought, "or I will cease to be human." She stood up. The trembling in her legs stopped. She went to the loose floorboard under the heavy wardrobe, prying it up with a fingernail. There, wrapped in a handkerchief, was her secret life, a stash of coins she had skimmed from the household accounts, penny by penny, over 3 years, a folded photograph of her sister, smiling in a garden in Ohio. She went to the wardrobe and took out her sturdy walking boots. She found the darkest dress she owned, a wool serge that scratched her skin. The next day, she went to Mrs. Chang's laundry. "I need to wash the curtains," Lila said loudly for the benefit of anyone passing by. Then, in a whisper, she leaned over the counter. "I am going." Mrs. Chang did not blink. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small packet wrapped in oilcloth. She pressed it into Lila's hand. It was heavy with dried beef and a thin roll of silver dollars. "Go tonight," Mrs. Chang murmured, scrubbing a stain on a shirt with ferocity. "Moon is dark, river is low. Do not look back. Looking back turns you to salt." "Thank you," Lila breathed. "Go," Mrs. Chang said. Lila walked home, the packet burning a hole in her pocket. She felt like a ghost walking through her own life. She cooked dinner. She mended Charles's socks. She read the Bible in the parlor while he smoked his pipe. The trigger came at 9 o'clock. Lila asked a question. It was a simple thing. "Charles, did you want me to order more flour for the winter?" Charles looked up from his newspaper. He had been drinking. The smell of whiskey was sharp on his breath. "Why do you ask me that?" he snapped. "Are you implying I cannot manage my own stores? That I am incompetent?" "No, you only meant to undermine me," he roared. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her by the throat, pinning her against the wall. His thumbs pressed into her windpipe. Lila clawed at his hands, her vision graying. "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as unto the Lord," Charles hissed, spittle flying onto her face. "For the husband is the head of the wife. Do you hear me? Lila, do you hear the word?" He squeezed tighter. Lila's lungs burned. She saw black spots. Then he let go. Lila slid to the floor, gasping, coughing, clutching her bruised throat. Charles stood over her, adjusting his cuffs. "Learn your place. Woman, next time, I won't stop." He turned and walked up the stairs to their bedroom. "I expect you in bed in 10 minutes." Lila lay on the floor, listening to his boots hit the floorboards above. She listened to the creak of the bed springs. She waited until the rhythm of his snoring began, a sound like a saw cutting through wood. She stood up. She did not go to the bedroom. She went to the kitchen. She put on her boots. She put on the dark dress. She took the small bag she had packed with the coins, the photo, and the food. She saw Charles's old heavy canvas coat hanging by the back door, too big for her, but warm. She put it on. She opened the back door. The cold air hit her like a slap, sharp and shocking. It was 20 degrees below freezing. The wind was a knife. Lila stepped out into the night. She did not close the door. She did not care if the snow blew into his pristine kitchen. She ran. She ran past the barn, past the corrals where the cattle huddled for warmth. She ran toward the river that marked the edge of the ward land. The ground was frozen hard, uneven and treacherous in the pitch blackness. There was no moon, only the cold. Indifferent stars watched her. Her breath burned in her chest. Every shadow looked like Charles. Every sound of the wind sounded like his voice calling her name. Coyotes yipped in the distance, a manic laughing sound that made her skin crawl. "He will wake up," she thought. "He will find me. He will drag me back by my hair." But she kept running. Her legs were numb. Her face was numb. She reached the riverbank. The cottonwood trees were skeletons against the dark sky, their branches rattling. The river was a black ribbon, churning with ice. She stopped, her chest heaving. She had to cross. If she crossed, she was on public land. She could hide in the hills. Then she saw the horse. A massive bay gelding stood in the shallows, breaking the thin ice near the edge to drink. A rider sat on its back, a dark silhouette against the stars. Lila froze. Panic seized her throat. One of Charles's men, it had to be. She turned to run back into the brush. "Easy," a voice said. It was not Charles. It was not a ranch hand. It was a voice like gravel and smoke. The rider nudged his horse out of the water and up the bank. He struck a lucifer match on his saddle horn. The sudden flare of light illuminated the scar on his jaw, the gray eyes, the battered hat. Cole Tanner. He held the match up, looking at her. He saw the coat that swallowed her small frame. He saw the terror in her wide eyes. He saw the red marks on her throat where Charles's fingers had been an hour ago. The match burned down, stinging his fingers, and he shook it out, plunging them back into darkness. But his eyes had adjusted. "You are the ward woman," he said. It wasn't a question. Lila couldn't speak. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. She hugged the canvas coat tighter around herself. Cole looked past her, toward the distant lights of the ranch house on the hill. Then he looked at the black, icy water of the river. He looked back at her. He didn't ask for her story. He didn't ask if she was guilty or innocent. He saw a woman running for her life, and that was all he needed to know. He shifted in his saddle, extending a gloved hand down toward her. "If you are going to cross, ma'am," he said, his voice steady over the sound of the wind and the rushing water. "Cross with me." Lila stared at his hand. It was big, scarred, leather-clad, a stranger's hand, a killer's hand. The town said. Behind her lay the warm house, the silk dresses, and the man who quoted scripture while he choked the life out of her. Ahead lay the freezing river, the dark unknown, and a man with a gun. The wind howled, pushing her forward. Lila reached up. Her fingers were small and white against his dark glove. "Yes," she whispered, the word lost to the wind. Cole's grip tightened around her hand, strong and sure. He didn't pull her roughly. He anchored her. Together, they turned toward the water. The water hit Lila like a sledgehammer made of ice. It stole the breath from her lungs and sent a shock of pain shooting up her legs. Sharp and immediate. The current was stronger than it looked from the bank. A black, muscular force that wanted to drag her down into the silt and keep her there. She stumbled, her boots slipping on the slick river stones, and for a terrifying second, the water rushed up to her waist, threatening to swallow her. "Hold on!" Cole's voice was a rough bark over the roar of the water. He did not wait for her to find her footing. He leaned low from the saddle, his leather duster dragging in the current, and clamped his hand around her forearm. His grip was iron. There was no hesitation, no testing of her weight. With a grunt of effort, he hauled her upward. Lila scrambled, her wet skirts heavy as lead, her fingers clawing at the saddle leather. The horse's mane, anything she could reach. Cole caught her by the back of Charles's heavy canvas coat and pulled her up in front of him. She landed awkwardly across the pommel, gasping for air, water streaming from her boots. Cole shifted her, his arm coming round her waist to lock her against his chest. "Easy," he murmured, but he was speaking to the horse now. The big bay gelding was fighting the current, its hooves slipping on the riverbed. "Get up there! Hop!" Lila pressed her face into the rough wool of Cole's coat. She was shivering so violently that her teeth clicked together, a sound she could not stop. The cold was a physical agony, boring into her bones. But as the horse lunged up the muddy bank on the far side, Lila realized she was not looking back. The terror of the freezing water was nothing compared to the terror of the warm house she had left behind. They were across. Cole did not stop at the water's edge. He spurred the horse forward, guiding it into a dense thicket of cottonwoods and willow brush that lined the riverbank. The branches whipped at them, scratching at the canvas coat, stripping the leaves from the brush. Only when they were deep in the shadows, hidden from the view of the ranch across the water, did he rein the horse in. He swung down from the saddle, his boots sinking into the half-frozen mud. He reached up and pulled Lila down. Her legs folded under her, numb and useless, and he had to catch her to keep her from collapsing into the dirt. "Stand up," he said, his voice low. "You have to keep moving or you will freeze." He moved with a frantic efficiency. He tied the horse to a low branch and began unbuckling his saddlebags. He pulled out a heavy wool blanket, smelling of horse sweat and wood smoke, and draped it over Lila's shivering shoulders. Through the screen of bare branches, they could see the distant lights of the Ward Ranch. They looked small now, like dying embers. A lantern moved on the porch. Someone was awake. Cole watched the light for a long moment, his jaw set. Then he turned to Lila. The darkness obscured his features, but she could feel the weight of his stare. "I need to know," Cole said. He did not raise his voice, but the demand was clear. "I need to know what kind of trouble I just pulled out of that river. Is it the law? Did you steal something?" Lila shook her head, her wet hair slapping against her cheeks. "No," she chattered. "No stealing." "Then who is looking for you? Because a woman does not run into an icy river in the middle of the night for the fun of it?" Lila looked at him. She saw the glint of the gun belt at his hip. She saw the size of him. But she also remembered the way he had helped the child in the street. She took a breath, the air burning her lungs. "My husband," she whispered. Cole went still. "Charles Ward." "Yes, he hurt you." It was a statement, not a question. He is a righteous man," Lila said, the old defense springing to her lips automatically, the lie she had told herself for 5 years. Then she stopped. She looked at the bruises on her wrist, hidden by the dark sleeve. "He thinks he owns me. He thinks God gave him the right to break me. If he finds me, he will kill me, or he will make me wish I was dead." Cole looked back at the ranch lights. He knew Charles Ward by reputation. Everyone did. The deacon, the rich man, the man who donated to the orphanage and underpaid his hands. Cole had known men like that before. Men who wore clean shirts and held Bibles and had souls as black as tar. He looked at his horse. He looked at the shivering woman wrapped in his blanket. He was a drifter. He had $10 in his pocket and a reputation that made sheriffs watch him when he rode into town. Taking this woman was kidnapping in the eyes of the law. It was a hanging offense if Ward had the judge in his pocket, which he surely did. But Cole remembered a woman in Abilene. He remembered the sound of a fist hitting flesh. He remembered the way he had sworn, standing over a dead man in a cheap saloon, that he would never walk away when he saw fear like that again. "He will come looking," Cole said. "He has men, he has money." "I know," Lila said. "I can go, I can walk. You do not have to." "You would be dead by morning." Cole cut her off. "Wolves or the cold? Take your pick." He walked back to the horse and checked the cinch. "I know a place. An old line shack up in the foothills. Used to belong to the Double Bar outfit before they went bust. It is hidden. Hard to get to if you do not know the trail. We can make it by dawn." He turned back to her. "But once you get on this horse with me, there is no going back. Mrs. Ward, you are an accomplice to a horse thief and a kidnapper. That is what they will call me." "Lila," she said. The name felt strange in her mouth, like she was claiming it for the first time. "My name is Lila." Cole nodded once. "All right. Lila, let's ride." He lifted her back onto the saddle. This time, he mounted behind her. There was no room for modesty. He pulled her back against his chest, wrapping the blanket tight around her, and took the reins. "Lean back," he told her. "Draw my heat." They rode out of the river bottom and turned toward the dark, looming shapes of the hills. The night was a long, blurring tunnel of cold and motion. The wind did not let up. It hissed through the sagebrush and moaned in the draws. But for the first time in her life, Lila felt a strange, terrifying safety. She was pressed against the length of Cole Tanner's body. She could feel the steady, slow thud of his heart against her back. It was a calm rhythm, unlike the frantic rabbit pulse of her own fear. She could feel the hard muscles of his arms on either side of her as he guided the horse, the rough texture of his duster, the smell of him. Tobacco. old leather, the sharp scent of pine pitch. She was exhausted, her body pushed beyond its limits, but her mind was awake, racing. She was a married woman, fleeing in the night with a stranger. The scandal of it would ruin her name forever. The women in town would purse their lips. The preacher would strike her name from the church roll. Let them, she thought. Let them have their names. I have my life. She dozed fitfully, her head falling back against Cole's shoulder. Every time she slipped, his arm tightened instinctively, holding her safe. He did not speak. He simply rode, a silent guardian in the dark, putting mile after mile between her and the man who claimed to own her. The dawn broke slowly, a bruised purple light bleeding over the eastern horizon. The air was so cold it seemed to snap. The landscape had changed. They were out of the flat plains and into the rough, broken country of the foothills. Scrub pine and juniper dotted the slopes, and rock formations jutted out of the earth like broken teeth. Almost there, Cole said. His voice was rough with fatigue. They crested a ridge, and there, nestled in a small hollow protected by a stand of ponderosa pines, was the shack. It was a pitiful thing. The roof sagged in the middle. The logs were gray and weathered, the chinking falling out in chunks. The door hung crooked on leather hinges. To anyone else, it would have looked like a ruin. To Lila, it looked like a palace. It looked like a place Charles Ward did not know. Cole reined in the horse and slid off, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. He reached up for her. Lila tried to dismount, but her legs were stiff and refused to obey. She practically fell into his arms. He caught her, holding her for a moment until she found her balance. His hands were large and warm through her coat. "Steady," he said. He led her to the door and kicked it open. The inside smelled of dust and rats and old wood smoke. It was freezing, darker than the outside, but it had 4 walls and a roof. "Stay here," Cole said. "I will see to the horse and get some wood." Lila stood in the middle of the room, clutching the blanket. She looked at the dirty floor. She looked at the blackened stone hearth. A sob caught in her throat, sharp and unexpected. She heard Cole outside, the rhythmic chop of a hatchet. The sound was domestic, normal. It broke something inside her. When Cole came back in, his arms full of dead wood and kindling, he found her standing exactly where he had left her. He did not speak. He knelt by the hearth and began to build a fire. Lila watched him. He shaved a piece of pine into thin curls with a knife he pulled from his belt. He stacked the wood with care, leaving space for the air to draw. He struck a match on his thumbnail and cupped the flame, coaxing the fire to life. It was such a small thing, the way he handled the wood, the way he poured water from his canteen into a battered tin kettle he found in the corner. He moved with a quiet reverence for the tools of survival. He did not throw things. He did not slam the wood down. The fire caught, snapping and popping, casting a warm, orange glow into the room. The heat washed over Lila, thawing her frozen hands, and then she broke. It started as a tremor in her chin, then a hitch in her chest. The exhaustion, the terror, the cold, the sheer enormity of what she had done crashed down on her. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and covered her face with her hands. Great. Racking sobs tore through her. She cried for the girl she had been who wanted to teach school. She cried for the bruises on her skin. She cried because she was in a shack with a strange man, and she was a fallen woman, and she had no money and no future. "I can't," she gasped. The words choked out between sobs. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I am weak. I am useless." Cole did not come over and hush her. He did not tell her to stop making a scene. He did not tell her she was hysterical. He sat back on his heels near the fire, taking off his hat. He ran a hand through his dark, matted hair. He let her cry. He gave her the space to fall apart. When the sobs quieted to hiccuping gasps, he spoke. He didn't look at her. He looked at the flames dancing in the grate. "I killed a man in Texas," he said. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Lila lowered her hands, sniffing, wiping her nose on her sleeve. She looked at him. It was in a saloon outside of Fort Worth. Cole continued. He was drunk. He was beating a girl who worked there, slamming her head against the bar. Nobody did anything. They just watched. I told him to stop. He pulled a knife. I shot him." He picked up a piece of wood and turned it over in his hands. "The girl lived, but the man, his brother, was the deputy. They put a price on me. Said it was murder. Said I gunned him down in cold blood." He looked at Lila then. His eyes were shadowed, full of old pain. "I have been running for 6 years, drifting. I have done things I am not proud of to stay alive. I am not a good man, Lila, but I learned one thing that night." "What?" Lila whispered. "That sometimes the law is just a piece of paper written by the men who have the biggest guns," Cole said. "And sometimes doing the right thing means you lose everything else." He tossed the wood into the fire. "You are not weak. You crossed that river. You are here. That is the only thing that matters." Lila stared at him. She saw the scar on his jaw, the white mark of violence. She had been taught that violence was a sin, that anger was the devil's work. But this man had used violence to save a woman he didn't know. He had lost his life for it. A strange feeling unfurled in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. They were both marked. They were both running. "Thank you," she said softly. Cole nodded. "Rest now. I will take the first watch." While Lila slept the sleep of the dead on the hard floor of the shack, wrapped in Cole's blanket, the sun rose over Bitter Creek. Charles Ward stood in the kitchen of his ranch house. The fire in the stove had gone out. The house was cold. He held a piece of paper in his hand, the note Lila had not written. There was no note, just an empty space where his wife should be. He had checked the barn. He had checked the river. He had seen the hoof prints in the mud on the far bank. A shod horse, a heavy horse. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were burning with a cold, blue fire. He did not scream. He did not throw the china. Charles Ward was a man of plans. He walked to the wall and took down his hat. He put on his coat. He checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, straightening his tie. He looked every inch the grieving, worried husband. He rode into town at a gallop. He went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller was a man who owed his position to the influence of the Ward family. He looked up from his desk, startled, as Charles strode in. "Mr. Ward, is something wrong?" "My wife," Charles said, his voice trembling with a perfectly manufactured emotion. "She is gone. Sheriff, taken." "Taken?" Miller stood up. "What do you mean?" "I woke up and she was gone. I found tracks by the river, a man's horse. There were signs of a struggle." Charles leaned his hands on the desk, looking the sheriff in the eye. "I believe it was that drifter, that Tanner fellow. I saw him watching her in town yesterday. He has kidnapped her. Sheriff, he has stolen my wife." The gossip spread through Bitter Creek faster than a prairie fire. By noon, the story had mutated and grown. Lila Ward had been dragged from her bed in her nightgown. Lila Ward had been seduced by a smooth-talking outlaw. Lila Ward was a victim. Lila Ward was a harlot who ran off. "I always said she was flighty." "Mrs." Baker whispered to her neighbor. "Ungrateful is what she is. After Mr. Ward gave her that beautiful home. Maybe she didn't want the home." "Mrs." Chang muttered as she scrubbed a sheet, but she spoke so low that no one heard her. Charles Ward sat in the church vestry with the elders, his head bowed in prayer. "We must find her," he said, "for the sake of her soul. That man, he is a devil. He will corrupt her. We must bring her back to the fold." He offered a reward, $500 for the capture of Cole Tanner. $500 for the safe return of Lila Ward. Men in the saloon checked their guns. $500 was a year's wages. The hunt was on. Up in the hills, the afternoon sun warmed the roof of the shack. Lila woke with a start, her hand flying to her throat. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the rough logs, the dying fire, and the empty room. Panic flared. Was he gone? Had he left her? The door opened and Cole stepped in. A blast of cold air followed him. He was carrying a dead jackrabbit by its ears. "You are awake," he said. Lila let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Yes, I scouted the ridge," Cole said, dropping the rabbit on the table. No sign of anyone yet, but they will come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will come. He walked over to his saddlebags and pulled out a heavy, dark object, a revolver. He checked the cylinder, snapping it shut with a fluid motion. He walked over to Lila and held it out. Handle first. Take it, he said. Lila stared at the gun. It looked heavy, cold, and cruel. I have never fired a gun. Charles didn't like them in the house. Charles isn't here, Cole said. Take it. Lila reached out. The metal was cold against her skin. It was heavier than she expected. Her hand trembled. 2 hands, Cole instructed. He moved behind her, his chest brushing her back. He reached around and adjusted her grip. His hands were rough, calloused, but his touch was impersonal. Instructive. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready. Point it like you are pointing your finger. Do not close your eyes when you shoot. Lila swallowed hard. I don't know if I can shoot a person. You don't shoot a person, Cole said, his voice near her ear. You shoot the threat. You shoot to stop them from putting hands on you ever again. Can you do that? Lila thought of the bruises. She thought of the scripture hissed in her ear. She gripped the handle tighter. Yes, she said. Good. Keep it with you. Always. Cole went to the table and began to skin the rabbit. Lila watched him for a moment, then stepped forward. Let me help, she said. Cole looked at her. It is messy work. I am a rancher's wife, Lila said, lifting her chin. I know where meat comes from. I am not useless. She took the knife from him. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she gutted the rabbit. She chopped the onions misses. Chang had given her. She put the meat in the old pot with water from the stream. Cole added coffee grounds to the boiling water. They ate in silence as the sun went down. It was a meager meal, tough meat and watery broth. But to Lila, it tasted like freedom. She had cooked it. She had earned it. No one criticized the salt. No one told her she was clumsy. Night fell heavy and absolute over the hills. The wind picked up again, whistling through the chinking in the logs. The fire was the only light in the world. Cole took the saddle blanket and laid it on the floor near the hearth. He gestured to the narrow wooden bunk built into the wall. You take the bed, he said. It has straw. Should be softer. You can't sleep on the floor, Lila said. It is freezing. I have slept on worse, Cole said. He sat down and began to pull off his boots. Go on. Lila climbed into the bunk. It was narrow and smelled of old straw, but it was off the ground. She kept her coat on, wrapping herself in the blanket he had given her. The room grew quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. Lila lay on her side, staring at the wall. She could hear Cole breathing. She could hear the rustle of his coat as he shifted on the hard floor. She turned her head. In the dying light of the fire, she could see his outline. He was lying on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes. They were alone, miles from anyone. A strange heat rose in Lila's cheeks. It was not the fire. She had been married for 5 years, but she knew nothing of men. She knew only Charles's heavy, demanding weight, his grunting exertion, the pain and the shame of the marital bed. She had learned to grit her teeth and wait for it to be over. She had thought that was all there was. But lying here, listening to the steady breathing of a man who had saved her life, a man who had covered her with a blanket and taught her to hold a gun, she felt something terrifying. She wanted to reach out. She wanted to know what his hand would feel like if it wasn't pulling her from a river or correcting her grip on a pistol. She wanted to know if the gentleness she saw in his eyes extended to his touch. The thought shocked her. It was a sin. She was a married woman. She was fleeing adultery charges, but the desire was there, a small, stubborn flame in the center of her chest. It was dangerous. It was forbidden. It was more frightening than the coyotes howling in the dark. Cole? She whispered. He didn't move, but the rhythm of his breathing changed. Yeah? Why did you do it? She asked. Why did you say cross with me? There was a long silence. A log settled in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Because, Cole said, his voice rough and low in the dark. "I saw the way you looked at the water. You looked like you were thinking about jumping in and not coming up. I couldn't watch that." Lila closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her nose. "Thank you," she said again. "Go to sleep." "Lila?" Cole said gently. "We have a long way to go." Lila pulled the blanket up to her chin. She listened to the wind. She listened to his heart beating in the silence of the room. Or perhaps it was just the echo of her own. She fell asleep with the terrifying realization that she was no longer running just away from something. She was running towards something, and she didn't know if she would survive that either. The days in the line shack bled into one another, marked not by the clock or the church bell, but by the movement of the sun across the cracked floorboards and the diminishing pile of firewood in the corner. Time, which had once been a rigid cage of schedules and demands under Charles's roof, now felt like a wide, frightening expanse of open prairie. Lila and Cole fell into a rhythm born of necessity. It was a silent, domestic dance performed on the edge of a precipice. Cole would rise before the sun, the air in the shack so cold that his breath plumed white in the dark. He would stoke the fire from the embers of the night before, his movements quiet and efficient, before taking his rifle and slipping out into the gray dawn to hunt. Lila would wake to the smell of wood smoke and the sound of the door latch clicking shut. Her days were spent in a battle against the encroaching filth and the biting cold. She swept the floor with a bundle of sagebrush tied together with twine. She mended the tear in Cole's duster with a needle and thread she had found in her small bag. Squinting in the dim light of the single grimy window, she cooked whatever Cole brought back: rabbit, sage grouse, once a scrawny deer, turning the tough meat into stews thickened with the last of Mrs. Chang's dried provisions. The landscape outside was a brutal masterpiece. The hills rolled away in waves of brown and gray, dusted with the white of frost that refused to melt in the shadows. The wind was a constant companion. It did not just blow. It hunted. It tore at the loose shingles of the roof and whistled through the gaps in the logs. A mournful, hungry sound that made Lila pull the blanket tighter around her shoulders. At night, the stars were terrifyingly bright. Sharp points of ice hammered into a black velvet sky, watching them with an indifference that made Lila feel very small. Every afternoon, when the sun was highest, Cole would take her outside to the edge of the clearing. He would set up a piece of firewood or point out a knot on a pine tree. "Again," he would say, his voice low and patient. Lila would raise the heavy revolver. At first, it had felt like a monster in her hand, a thing of death that she had no right to touch. But day by day, the weight became familiar. She learned to plant her feet, to breathe out slowly, to squeeze the trigger rather than jerk it. The first time she hit the tree trunk, sending a spray of bark flying. She dropped the gun in shock. Cole did not laugh. He picked it up, dusted it off, and handed it back to her. "Good," he said. "Now do it again." It was not a game. Lila knew that. She saw the way Cole scanned the horizon. His eyes narrowed against the glare. She saw the tension in his shoulders when the wind shifted. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop. On the 6th day, the sky turned a bruised, sullen gray. The wind died down, replaced by a heavy, ominous silence. The air smelled of iron and ice. Cole stood in the doorway, watching the clouds banking up over the mountains in the west. He turned to Lila, who was stirring the pot over the fire. "We have to move," he said. Lila looked up, the wooden spoon pausing in her hand. "Now, it looks like a storm is coming." "That is why we have to go," Cole said, closing the door and shutting out the cold. "If the snow comes while we are here, we are trapped. We will starve or freeze. And if the snow holds off, Ward's men will have widened their circle. They will check the line shacks first. It is the only shelter for 20 miles. "Where will we go?" Lila asked. The fear, which had been a low hum, spiked in her chest. "Red Hollow," Cole said. "It is a mining town about 3 days' ride south. Rough place. People there don't ask too many questions. We can get lost in the noise." He walked over to the table and looked at her. His gray eyes were serious, searching her face. But we can't ride in there as a drifter and a runaway wife. The sheriff in Red Hollow is lazy, but he isn't blind. If a man like Charles has put money on our heads, those posters will be traveling fast. So what do? We lie, Cole said. We ride in as a married couple, farmers maybe, or travelers looking for work. You are Mrs. Tanner. The name hung in the air between them. Mrs. Tanner. It sounded heavy and strange. A stone dropped into a still pond. Lila looked at her hands, red from the cold water and rough work. Mrs. Tanner, she repeated softly. It did not taste like a lie. It tasted like a shield. It is just for the road, Cole added quickly, turning away to pack his saddlebags. Just to keep heads from turning. I know, Lila said, but her heart was beating a strange, frantic rhythm against her ribs. They left within the hour. The big bay horse puffed and stamped as Cole tightened the cinch. He mounted first, then reached down to pull Lila up. She settled in front of him, the saddle horn pressing against her thigh, his arms coming around her to take the reins. Lean back, he told her. It is going to be a long ride. Lila hesitated for a fraction of a second, her back stiff. Then she exhaled and let her weight rest against his chest. He was solid, warm, a wall of living heat against the biting cold. They rode south, skirting the timberline to stay hidden. The first flakes of snow began to fall as they descended into the valley, lazy spirals of white that melted on the horse's mane. For Lila, the journey was a blur of physical sensations. The rocking gait of the horse, the bite of the wind on her cheeks, and overwhelmingly, the presence of the man holding her. She had spent 5 years learning to flinch at a man's touch. Charles's hands had been possessive, demanding, or violent. He touched her like he owned the livestock, checking for flaws, asserting control. But Cole's arms were different. He held the reins, not her. His arms formed a cage, but it was a cage that kept the world out, not kept her in. When the horse stumbled on a loose rock, Cole's arm tightened reflexively around her waist, pulling her secure against him. Lila gasped, her body locking up in an old, ingrained panic. I've got you, Cole murmured into her ear, his voice rumbling through his chest and into her back. I won't let you fall. He loosened his grip the moment the horse was steady, respecting the terror he sensed in her muscles. Lila forced herself to breathe. She forced herself to unclench her hands from the pommel. He is not Charles, she told herself. He is not Charles. The snow began to fall harder as evening approached, turning the world into a gray-white blur. They could not make the next ridge before dark. They were in open country, miles from any town or tree line thick enough to offer real shelter. We have to camp, Cole said, shouting over the rising wind. He found a shallow depression in the earth, protected on one side by a crumbling cut bank and a few scrub junipers. It was not much, but it would break the wind. They set up a canvas lean-to, rigging it low to the ground. There was no wood for a fire, only dry sagebrush that burned hot and fast and was gone in seconds. They ate cold, dried meat and drank icy water from the canteen. When it came time to sleep, Cole laid out the single bedroll under the canvas. The ground was freezing. The air was deadly cold. We have to share the blankets, Cole said. He did not look at her. He was busy arranging the saddle to block the wind at their heads. We will freeze separately. I know, Lila said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling as she unlaced her boots. They lay down together in the small, dark space. Cole lay on his back, and Lila lay on her side, her back to him. He pulled the heavy wool blankets over them, tucking the edges in to seal out the draft. Then, tentatively, he moved closer. He draped his arm over her waist, pulling her back until she was pressed against the length of him. Just for warmth, he whispered. Just for warmth. She echoed, but it was more than warmth, lying there in the dark, with the snow hissing against the canvas inches from her face. Lila felt a terrifying awareness of him. She could feel the heavy buckle of his belt against her hip. She could feel the roughness of his shirt. She could feel the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. She was married to another man, a man who was likely hunting them right now. She was a fugitive, and yet every nerve in her body was singing with a strange, dark electricity. Cole did not move. He did not let his hand wander. He lay as still as a statue, his breathing controlled and deep. His restraint was a physical thing, a wall he had built between them. It was intoxicating. Charles had never restrained himself. Charles took what he wanted, when he wanted it, regardless of her tears or her silence. Cole's stillness told her that her body belonged to her. He would freeze before he took something she did not give. The wind howled outside, a lonely, desolate sound. Lila shifted, turning her head slightly. "Cole?" "Yeah, I'm afraid," she whispered. "I know," he said. "The storm will pass." "Not of the storm," she said. She turned further, shifting until she was facing him in the dark. She could not see his face, only the shadow of his jaw and the brim of his hat. "I am afraid because I don't know how to be here, with you." She moved her head, resting her forehead against the hard line of his collarbone. She felt his breath hitch. "Just once." "I don't know how to be touched without bracing for pain," she confessed, the words spilling out into the dark. "I am waiting for you to get angry. I am waiting for you to hurt me." Cole's hand moved. He did not grab her. He brought his hand up slowly and rested it on her hair. His fingers light, barely there. "I ain't gonna hurt you, Lila," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't place. "And I ain't gonna touch you in any way you don't want. We can lie here like two stones in a river if that is what you need. I will move only where you lead. You understand?" Lila closed her eyes, tears leaking out to wet his shirt. "Yes. Go to sleep, Mrs. Tanner," he whispered. She slept, and for the first time in 5 years, she did not dream of running. Red Hollow lived up to its name. It was a gouge in the red earth, a cluster of wooden buildings huddled together as if for protection against the vast, empty sky. The main street was a river of churned mud, frozen in ruts in the morning and a sucking quagmire by noon. Tumbleweeds, driven by the relentless wind, piled up against the boardwalks like skeletons. They rode in on the third afternoon. The disguise held. To the weary eyes of the townspeople, they were just another couple down on their luck. A man in a battered coat and a woman with her head ducked against the wind. They found a room at a boarding house on the edge of town. It was a narrow, 2-story building with peeling paint, run by a woman named Mrs. Gable. She was a widow with suspicious eyes and a mouth like a trap. $3 a week, Mrs. Gable said, eyeing Cole's gun belt and Lila's travel-stained dress. "Payment in advance. No drinking in the room. No loud noises. We are a respectable house." "We are respectable people," Cole said, placing $3 silver on the counter. "Name is Tanner. This is my wife, Mrs." Gable swept the coins into her apron pocket. "Room 4, upstairs. Breakfast is at 6. If you miss it, you don't eat." The room was small, with a single iron bedstead, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, and a window that looked out over the alley, but it was dry, and it had a stove. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning under her weight. "We made it, for now," Cole said. He went to the window, peering out through the grime. "I will go to the livery, see if they need a hand. You stay here, rest." "No," Lila said. She stood up. "I need clothes, and I need work. We can't live on your $10 forever." Cole looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the steel spine that had carried her across the river. He nodded. "Be careful. Don't tell anyone where we came from." Over the next 2 weeks, they carved out a fragile existence in the dust of Red Hollow. Cole found work at the livery stable and occasionally at a nearby ranch. It was brutal, back-breaking labor. He spent his days shoveling manure, fixing fences, and breaking green horses that other men were too scared to mount. He came back to the room each evening smelling of sweat and animals, his muscles trembling with exhaustion, his knuckles skinned and bloody. Lila bought a second-hand calico dress and a sturdy apron from the general store. It was plain, faded, and nothing like the silk and velvet Charles had dressed her in. She loved it. It was her own. She found work at a small cafe down the street. It was a greasy, noisy place filled with miners and cowhands. She washed dishes until her hands were raw, peeled sacks of potatoes, and mended aprons for the owner. It was there she met the other women. There was Ruby, a woman with dyed red hair and a hard face who had once worked in a saloon but was trying to make a living as a seamstress. There was Sarah, a young rancher's daughter whose husband had died of fever, leaving her with 2 children and no money. And there was Bessie, the wife of a black freighter, who worked in the kitchen and suffered the indignities of the town with a quiet, regal dignity. They were a sorority of survival. They did not ask Lila many questions, sensing the shadows in her eyes. "You got a good man?" Ruby asked one afternoon as they sat on the back stoop, taking a break. She was smoking a thin cigarette she rolled herself. Lila flinched at the question. "Yes, he is. He works hard." "Does he hit you?" Ruby asked bluntly. Lila looked down at her hands. "No, never." "Then he is a prince," Ruby said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Hold on to him. Most men out here are just wolves in trousers." The social judgment of the town was a constant, low-grade fever. When Lila walked down the street with Cole on Sundays, people watched. They whispered, "Who are they? Where did they come from? He looks like a gunman. Look at that scar. She is too pretty for a dirt farmer's wife, probably running from something." Men in the cafe would lean over the counter when Lila was wiping it down. "Where's your husband tonight, darling? You look lonely." Lila learned to keep her eyes down, to give non-committal answers, to use the name Tanner like a shield, but the fear never left her. Every time the door opened, she expected to see Charles standing there, his face twisted in righteous fury. But the most dangerous thing in Red Hollow wasn't the gossip or the hard work. It was the room at the top of the stairs. It was the intimacy of sharing a life with Cole without truly sharing it. They slept in the same bed, lying stiffly side by side, terrified to move. They ate their meager suppers sitting on the floor by the stove, talking about the weather, about the price of beans, about anything except the electricity that crackled between them. One evening, Cole came back later than usual. It had been raining, a cold, sleety rain that turned the red dust to slime. He was soaked to the bone, shivering as he came through the door. Lila was waiting. She had heated water on the stove. "You are frozen," she said, standing up. "It is a rough night," Cole said, hanging his hat on the peg. He looked exhausted, his face gray with fatigue, the scar on his jaw standing out starkly against his pale skin. "Wash up," Lila said softly. "I have warm water." She poured the water into the ceramic basin on the washstand. Cole stripped off his sodden shirt. His back was a map of muscles and old scars. Lila turned away to give him privacy, pretending to busy herself with mending a shirt. But when she turned back, he had finished washing his face and was drying it with a towel. Lila had let her hair down for the night. It fell in a heavy, dark curtain around her shoulders. She had unbuttoned the high collar of her dress to wash her own neck. Cole lowered the towel. He stopped. The lamplight cast a golden glow over the room. It caught the curve of Lila's bare neck, the hollow of her throat, the softness of her shoulder. Cole stared at her. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and thick. It was not the silence of the line shack or the trail. It was a silence filled with a hunger that had been starving for weeks. Lila felt a pull in her chest so strong it frightened her. She looked at him, this scarred, dangerous, gentle man who had ridden into hell for her. She saw the way his eyes tracked the line of her throat. She saw his hands clench into fists at his sides, as if he was physically restraining himself from reaching out. She was still married. The law said she belonged to Charles. The church said she was committing a sin by even being here, but Charles was a ghost. Charles was pain and darkness. Cole was standing in front of her, warm and alive. Lila took a step forward. Then another. "Cole," she whispered. He looked at her eyes then. "Lila, don't. I am hanging on by a thread here." "Let go," she said. She reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, trembling slightly. She pressed it to her cheek. Cole let out a ragged breath. Like a man surfacing from deep water, he turned his hand, cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You are sure?" he asked, his voice a wreck. "Lila, if we do this, there is no going back. I am a wanted man. I have nothing to give you but a hard life." "I don't want a soft life," Lila said fiercely. "I want a life that is mine. I want you." He lowered his head. The kiss was not like the kisses in the dime novels. It was tentative at first, a question asked and answered. His lips were chapped, tasting of rain and salt. He kissed her as if he was afraid she might break. But Lila did not break. She pressed into him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in his damp hair. She opened her mouth to him, a surrender that was also a demand. The kiss deepened, turning hot and desperate. Cole groaned low in his throat, his arms coming around her, pulling her crushed against his chest. The hunger they had both been suppressing exploded. He lifted her, carrying her the 2 steps to the bed. He laid her down as if she were made of glass. But his hands were urgent. There was no fear. That was the miracle of it. Lila had thought she would be afraid. She had thought her body would remember the pain of Charles and shut down. But with Cole, every touch was a revelation. He did not take, he asked. He did not conquer, he worshipped. He undressed her slowly, his eyes drinking in the sight of her in the lamplight. He kissed the scars on her soul. He kissed the hollow of her throat where the pulse beat frantically. "Lila," he whispered against her skin. "Beautiful." When they finally joined together, it was not an act of duty. It was a reclaiming. It was fierce and tender and clumsy and perfect. Lila cried out, not in pain, but in shock at the sheer intensity of feeling, the realization that this heat, this connection, this pleasure was what had been stolen from her. Later, the room was quiet. The lamp had burned down to a flicker. Lila lay with her head on Cole's chest, her hair spread out over his skin like a dark fan. His arm was around her, holding her close, his fingers idly tracing patterns on her bare arm. She felt raw, open. She felt a guilt that clawed at the edges of her mind, the guilt of the adulteress, the runaway. But stronger than the guilt was a fierce, protective joy. "You okay?" Cole asked, his voice rumbling in his chest. Lila nodded against him. "Yes." "I don't own you." "Lila," Cole said quietly. He sounded like he was making a vow. "I never will. You are free, even with me. You understand that?" Lila lifted her head to look at him. His eyes were dark in the shadows, but she knew the expression in them. "I know," she said. "That is why I chose you." Outside, the wind howled through the crooked chimneys of Red Hollow, rattling the window pane. It was a reminder. The world was still out there. Charles was still out there. The law was still coming. But in the small, warm circle of the bed, Lila closed her eyes and listened to Cole's heart beating against her ear. And for tonight, it was enough. While Lila and Cole were building their fragile sanctuary in the dust of Red Hollow, Charles Ward was weaving a net of iron and paper across the Wyoming territory. He did not ride out into the blizzard himself. Men of his station did not freeze their fingers when they could pay others to do it. He sat in his study, the air thick with the smell of pipe tobacco and cold determination, and waged a war of reputation. He hired the Pinkerton Agency, sending a wired draft to their Denver office with instructions to spare no expense. He visited the printer in Bitter Creek, a man who owed him money for a new press, and commissioned a stack of circulars. The broadsheets were stark and damning. They featured a woodcut likeness of a rough-looking man and bold, blocky type, wanted for kidnapping and robbery. Cole Tanner, $500 reward, below the headline. Charles had composed a narrative that broke hearts and hardened fists. It spoke of a delicate, devout wife, Lila Ward, snatched from her home in the dead of night by a desperate gunman. It hinted at forced coercion. It painted Charles not as a tyrant, but as a grieving husband willing to move heaven and earth to rescue his bride from a predator. The telegrams traveled faster than any horse. They clicked over the wires, jumping from station to station. carrying Charles's version of the truth to every sheriff within 300 miles. Sheriff Ed Hatcher of Red Hollow was a man who preferred his days quiet and his whiskey cheap. He sat in his office, feet up on the scarred desk, when the telegraph operator from the depot came running in, waving a yellow slip of paper. Hatcher read the message twice. He rubbed his bristly chin, his eyes narrowing. He thought about the couple who had ridden in 2 weeks ago. The Tanner folks, quiet, kept to themselves. The man worked hard at the livery, muscles like twisted rope, scarred face. The woman looked at the ground a lot. Well now, Hatcher grunted, swinging his boots to the floor. Seems we are harboring a celebrity. He stood up, checking the load in his Colt revolver. Get Deputy Klein. Tell him to bring the shotgun. Cole was sweating. The afternoon sun beat down on the livery yard, turning the corral into a dusty oven. He was shoeing a sour-tempered roan mare that had already tried to kick him twice. He had the mare's hoof between his knees, driving the nails with precise, rhythmic taps. He was tired, but it was a good tired. It was the exhaustion of honest work, not the frantic, adrenaline-fueled exhaustion of looking over his shoulder. Tonight, he would go back to the room. Lila would be there. They would eat stew, and she would read to him from a discarded newspaper she had found. And then they would turn down the lamp. The thought made a softness bloom in his chest that he quickly tamped down. Cole Tanner! The voice was a shout, harsh and commanding. Cole did not drop the hoof immediately. He set the foot down gently, patted the mare's flank, and straightened up slowly. He wiped his hands on a rag, turning toward the gate. Sheriff Hatcher stood there, his service revolver drawn and leveled at Cole's chest. Beside him, a young deputy held a double-barreled shotgun, his knuckles white on the stock. Easy, Cole said, his voice level. He kept his hands away from his hips. What is this, Sheriff? You know what this is. Hatcher spat. I have a telegram here from Charles Ward. Says you stole his wife. Says you robbed his safe before you left. Cole went still. The air seemed to leave the yard. I didn't steal a dime, and the lady came with me of her own free will. That ain't what the telegram says, Hatcher said, stepping closer, the gun never wavering. And the law don't generally believe that a rich man's wife runs off with a broke drifter unless she was forced. Turn around, hands behind your back. Cole looked at the gun. He looked at the open gate. He could draw. He was fast enough. He could probably drop the sheriff before the deputy pulled the triggers. But then what? A shootout in the street? Lila watching him die? Or worse, him killing 2 lawmen and dragging Lila into a life of running from a murder charge? Cole exhaled slowly. He saw the trap closing, the iron jaws of Charles Ward's influence snapping shut. She came with me, Cole said again, firmly. She was running for her life. Tell it to the judge, Hatcher said. Cuff him. Klein. The cold metal bit into Cole's wrists. They shoved him forward, marching him out of the livery and onto the main street, down the block, inside the steamy front window of the cafe. Lila was stacking dirty plates. She laughed at something Bessie said, a rare, genuine sound. She turned to carry the tray to the kitchen. Then she looked out the window. The tray slipped from her fingers. The crash of china shattering on the floor was deafening, but Lila didn't hear it. She saw Cole. He was walking between the 2 lawmen, his head high, his hands bound behind his back. The sheriff had a grip on his arm. No, Lila whispered. The blood drained from her face, leaving her dizzy. No, no, no! The cafe went silent. Everyone looked at the broken dishes, then at Lila, then out the window. That is your husband, Bessie said, her voice low and urgent. They are taking him, Lila gasped. She took a step toward the door, her apron tangled in her legs. Stop, Bessie said, grabbing Lila's arm with a grip surprising for her age. Don't go out there running and screaming. You will just make it worse. They have guns. Child. Lila pressed her hand to her mouth, watching through the glass as the jailhouse door swallowed the man she loved. Her world, which had finally started to settle into something solid. tilted violently on its axis, and collapsed. The jail cell was a stone box that smelled of mildew and unwashed bodies. Cole sat on the cot, staring at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light from the high, barred window. He had tried to explain. He had told Hatcher about the bruises. He had told him about the night at the river. Hatcher had just shrugged, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. "Look, Tanner, you are a drifter with a reputation. Mister, Ward is a pillar of the community. He has got a deed to that land and a license for that marriage. You got nothing but a story. And in my experience, the man with the money writes the history." Cole had stopped talking then. He knew when words were useless. 3 days passed. Lila came to the jail every morning, but the sheriff wouldn't let her in. "Prisoner is dangerous, ma'am," he said, blocking the door with his bulk. "And frankly, until Mr. Ward gets here, I ain't sure if you are a victim or an accomplice. Best you stay in your room." On the 4th day, a black carriage with red wheels rolled into Red Hollow. It was drawn by 2 matching grays, sleek and well-fed. It looked like a hearse. Charles Ward stepped out. He was dressed in a black suit, his linen shirt blindingly white, a black hat shading his eyes. He looked impeccable. He looked like Judgment Day. He did not go to the hotel. He went straight to the sheriff's office. A crowd gathered, whispering. They watched as the grieving husband shook the sheriff's hand, his face a mask of stoic suffering. "Thank you, Sheriff," Charles said, his voice carrying clearly to the onlookers. "You have done the Lord's work. I have been praying for her safety every hour." He played the part perfectly. He was the wronged man, the protector, the rock upon which the waves of sin broke. An hour later, the sheriff unlocked the heavy oak door to the cell block. "Visitor," he grunted. Charles walked in. The sheriff closed the door, leaving them alone. Cole stood up. He walked to the bars. He did not blink. Charles stopped 3 feet away. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his nose, as if the smell of the prisoner offended him. He looked Cole up and down, taking in the dirty shirt, the stubble, the exhaustion. "You look like an animal," Charles said softly. "Which is fitting." "She is not going back with you," Cole said. His voice was rough, scraping like sandpaper. Charles smiled. It was the smile Lila knew, the one that meant pain. "Oh, I think she is. In fact, I know she is." "She hates you," Cole said. "She fears you." "She is confused," Charles corrected. "She is a weak vessel. Mr. Tanner, she needs a strong hand to guide her. She was happy before you poisoned her mind with your lust." Charles stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was a hiss. "Here is how this is going to go. You are going to rot in here. I have brought charges of kidnapping, assault, and grand larceny. I have witnesses in Bitter Creek who will swear you robbed my safe before you took her." "That is a lie," Cole said, his knuckles white on the iron bars. "It is a story," Charles said. "And I tell better stories than you. If you fight this, if you drag her name through the mud, if you dare to mention one word of what she might have told you about our private life, I will hang you. I will buy the judge. I will buy the jury. And I will watch you kick at the end of a rope." Charles paused, letting the threat settle. "And Lila, I will ruin her. I will have her declared insane. I will lock her in an asylum where no one will ever hear her scream again. Or, you can be the villain. You can let me save her. And maybe, just maybe, I will let you live to rot in a prison cell instead of a pine box." Cole lunged at the bars, a guttural sound tearing from his throat. Charles didn't flinch. He just watched, his eyes cold and dead. "Think about it, Cowboy," Charles said. "Her life is in your hands." The interrogation was held the next morning in the Oddfellows' Hall behind the church. It wasn't a trial. It was a spectacle. Charles had insisted on a public clearing of the air before any legal proceedings. He wanted the town to see his benevolence. He wanted to shame Lila into submission before a crowd. The hall was packed. Men in their Sunday suits, women in bonnets, miners with coal dust in their creases. Everyone wanted to see the drama. Lila sat on a wooden chair in the center of the room. She wore her faded calico dress. She felt naked. She felt small. Charles sat at a table at the front, flanked by the town preacher and the mayor of Red Hollow. He looked sorrowful. "Lila," Charles began, his voice trembling with emotion. "We are not here to judge you. We are here to bring you home." Lila looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed from sleeplessness. "I am not going home." "Charles." A ripple of shock went through the room. "You are not yourself," Charles said gently. "This man, this criminal, he took you against your will, did he not? He threatened you?" "No," Lila said. Her voice was thin, but audible. "He saved me." Charles sighed, looking at the crowd as if to say, "See, she is delusional." "Lila," the preacher cut in, "you took vows. For better or worse, to leave your husband is a sin against God. To lie with another man, that is a stain that does not wash out." "He beat me," Lila said. She looked at the women in the front row. "He choked me. He kept me a prisoner in that house." "Hysteria," Charles said quickly, sadly. "I tried to help her. She has always had episodes. I had to restrain her from hurting herself. I did it out of love." The crowd murmured. It was easier to believe the rich, well-dressed man than the shaking woman in the cheap dress. It was more comfortable to believe that wives were hysterical than to believe that husbands were monsters. "Lila," Charles said, leaning forward, "here is the offer. Admit you were confused. Admit he forced you. Come home. I will forgive you. The church will forgive you. We will put this behind us. Your reputation can be salvaged." He pointed a finger at the door, toward the jail. "But if you persist in these lies, if you choose that criminal over your duty, he will hang, and you will be an outcast. No decent home will ever open its door to you. You will starve in the gutter." Lila looked at him. She felt the weight of the town pressing down on her. The judgment was a physical thing, thick as smoke. She heard the whispers. Wayward wife, fallen woman, ungrateful. She thought of the pantry at the ranch, the darkness where she used to hide. She thought of Cole's neck in a noose. Her voice broke. "Give her time," Charles said magnanimously. "She is overwhelmed. We will reconvene tomorrow at noon. She will make the right choice." He stood up. "Sheriff, take her back to her room. Make sure she has no visitors." Lila sat in the dark of her room at the boarding house. She had not lit the lamp. She sat on the edge of the bed where she and Cole had loved each other, feeling the cold seep into her bones. She was trapped. If she told the truth, Cole died. If she lied, she died. A slow, spiritual death in Charles's house. There was a soft knock at the door. "Go away, Sheriff," Lila whispered. "It ain't the sheriff," a voice whispered back. Lila opened the door. Esther stood there. Behind her were Ruby, the red-haired seamstress, and Bessie. They slipped inside quickly, closing the door behind them. Ruby lit the lamp, turning it low. "We heard what happened?" Bessie said. She held a basket covered with a napkin. "Brought you some supper. Figured you hadn't eaten." Lila looked at them. These women who lived on the edges. Esther, half Lakota, ignored by the white town. Ruby, a former saloon girl, judged by the wives. Bessie, black and invisible until someone needed a floor scrubbed. "Why are you here?" Lila asked. "If Charles sees you—" "To hell with Charles," Ruby said, spitting the words. She sat on the floor, arranging her skirts. "I had a husband once. He liked to use his belt. Everyone in town knew. Nobody said a damn word. I had to break a bottle over his head to get out." Esther nodded. "My mother was married to a white trader. He treated her like a dog. When she ran, they called her a thief." Bessie reached out and took Lila's hand. Her palm was rough and warm. "We know a wolf when we see one. Child, that man in the suit, he is a wolf, and he has got the whole town thinking he is a shepherd. I can't let Cole die," Lila whispered, tears spilling over. "He says he will hang him." "He is bluffing," Ruby said, though she didn't look sure. "He isn't. Lila said. He has the money to do it. Then you have a choice, Bessie said. You can save the man's neck and lose your soul. Or you can stand up and tell the truth, even if your voice shakes. Even if they don't believe you. They won't listen, Lila said. We will listen, Esther said fiercely. We will be there tomorrow, standing right at the front, and if he tries to drag you away, he is going to have to drag us too. Lila looked at their faces. She saw shared pain. Yes, but she also saw iron. She saw the strength that comes from surviving a world that wants to crush you. Thank you, Lila said. Go see him, Ruby said, digging into her pocket and pulling out a heavy iron key. I used to know the deputy. He owes me a favor. He is on watch tonight. He will let you in for 5 minutes. The jail was quiet. The deputy, a young man with a guilty face, unlocked the outer door and nodded to Lila. 5 minutes, Mrs. Ward. Then you gotta go. Lila walked to the cell. Cole was standing there, his hands gripping the bars. He looked older than he had yesterday. The lines around his eyes were etched deep. Lila, he breathed. She reached through the bars. He took her hands. His grip was desperate. Did he hurt you? Cole asked, scanning her face. If he touched you? He didn't touch me, Lila said. He hurt me with words. He wants me to say I was kidnapped. He says if I come back, he will let you live in prison. If I don't, he will hang you. Cole closed his eyes. He pressed his forehead against the cold iron bars. I knew it. I knew he would play it that way. I have to do it. Cole, Lila said, a sob catching in her throat. I can't let them kill you. I will go back. I will tell them I was confused. I will live the lie. Cole's eyes snapped open. He gripped her hands tighter, pulling her as close as the bars allowed. No, he said. The word was a command. Cole, listen to me, he said, his voice fierce and low. I have spent 6 years running from a killing. I have lived in the shadows. I have been nobody. But these last weeks, with you, I was a man again. I was clean. He looked deep into her eyes. I would rather swing from a rope tomorrow knowing you are free than sit in a cell for 20 years knowing you are back in that house with him. Do not do that to me, Lila. Do not make my life worth your slavery. But you will die, she whispered. Maybe, Cole said. Or maybe the truth is stronger than his money. But you have to choose yourself. Lila. Not me, not him. You. What do you want? Lila looked at him. She looked at the scar on his jaw. She looked at the man who had asked her to cross the river, who had slept on the floor, who had taught her to shoot. He was offering her the ultimate gift, his life for her freedom. She realized then that Charles had never asked her what she wanted. He had told her. The town had told her. Her father had told her. Only Cole had asked. The fear that had been paralyzing her, the fear of the town, of the scandal, of the future, began to recede. In its place, something hot and hard began to form. It was anger. It was dignity. I want to be free, she said. Her voice was steady. Cole nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He brought her knuckles to his lips and kissed them. Then tomorrow, he said, you stand up there and you tell them the truth. You tell them everything, and let the devil take the rest. Time's up, the deputy called from the door. Lila pulled her hands away. She felt electric. She felt terrified, but she no longer felt confused. I love you, Cole Tanner, she said. I love you, Lila, he answered. She turned and walked out of the jail. She walked out into the dusty street of Red Hollow. The wind was blowing, cold and biting, but she lifted her face to it. She was done hiding. Tomorrow, she would burn Charles Ward's world to the ground, or she would burn with it. The Oddfellows Hall was a long, rectangular building that usually hosted dances and town council meetings. But today it felt like a stifling, windowless box designed to trap heat and judgment. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool, sawdust, and the nervous sweat of 300 people packed onto benches meant for 200. Dust motes danced in the thick shafts of light that cut through the high windows. swirling like tiny, suspended accusations. At the front of the room, behind a heavy oak table that served as a makeshift bench, sat Judge Thaddeus Miller. He was a circuit judge, a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had seen too many hangings. He tapped his gavel, a dull thud that barely cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Order," Miller rasped. "This is not a carnival. If I hear another whisper, I will clear this hall." Lila sat on a hard wooden chair to the left of the judge. She kept her hands folded in her lap, gripping her fingers so tightly the knuckles were white. She could feel the eyes of the town on her skin. They were heavy, physical things. She saw the women of the church whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting from her faded dress to the bruises on her soul. She saw the men, leaning forward with a mixture of pity and salacious curiosity. Charles Ward sat at the plaintiff's table. He looked immaculate. His black suit was brushed free of dust. His collar was stiff and white, and his face wore an expression of pained, stoic dignity. Beside him sat his lawyer, a man named Mr. Blackwood from Cheyenne, who had a voice like oiled leather. Cole Tanner was seated on a bench to the right, guarded by Deputy Klein. Cole was still in the clothes he had worn for weeks, stained with mud and sweat. His hands were manacled in iron cuffs that rested heavy in his lap. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at Lila. "Mr." Blackwood stood up, hooking his thumbs into his waistcoat. He paced slowly before the crowd, commanding the room. "Your Honor," Blackwood began, his voice smooth and carrying to the back of the hall. "We are here to address a tragedy of a mind unraveled and a home destroyed. We are here to show that Mrs. Lila Ward, a woman known to be sensitive, was preyed upon in her moment of weakness by a man with a history of violence." Blackwood walked to the table and picked up one of the circulars Charles had printed. He held it up for the room to see. "Cole Tanner," Blackwood read, the name dripping with disdain. "A drifter, a gunman, a man who shoots first and asks questions later. He saw a woman of means, a woman of fragility, and he saw an opportunity. He saw a payday." He turned to Charles. "Mr. Ward, please tell the court about the night your wife was taken." Charles stood up slowly. He looked at Lila with eyes that seemed brimming with sorrow. "I woke up to a cold house," Charles said softly. "The door was open. I found tracks in the snow, a horse, a heavy man's stride. I knew immediately that something terrible had happened. My wife, Lila. She has always been given to fancies. She is delicate. She dreams of things that are not there. I feared she had wandered off in a spell. But when I saw the tracks, I knew she had been stolen. Did you ever strike your wife, Mr. Ward?" Blackwood asked. "Strike her?" Charles looked horrified. He placed a hand over his heart. "I loved her. I gave her a home, safety, guidance. I took a vow before God to protect her. Why would I harm the thing I hold most dear?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "He is a good man," someone whispered. "Paid for the church roof." Blackwood turned to the judge. "You see, Your Honor, we have a devoted husband, and we have a kidnapper who dragged a confused woman across a frozen river and held her in a shack for weeks. The law is clear." "Call Lila Ward," the judge said, his voice dry. Lila stood up. Her legs felt like water. She walked to the witness chair, the wood creaking under her weight. She sat down. She looked out at the sea of faces. She saw the baker who had sold her bread. She saw the blacksmith. She saw the women who had turned their backs when she walked down the street. "State your name," the judge said. "Lila Ward," she said. Her voice was a whisper. "Speak up," Charles said from his table. It was a command, disguised as helpful advice. Lila flinched. The reaction was small, involuntary, but Cole saw it. He leaned forward, the chains rattling. "Lila," the judge said more gently, "tell us why you left the ranch that night." Lila took a breath. She looked at Charles. He was staring at her with that flat, shark-like gaze, daring her to speak. He was daring her to destroy herself. Then she looked at Cole. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. "Choose yourself." Lila looked back at the crowd. She found the face of Esther in the back row. Esther nodded too. "I did not leave because I was confused," Lila said. Her voice shook, but it was louder this time. "And I was not taken. I ran." "Why?" the judge asked. "Because I was afraid I would not live to see the morning." Lila said, "Mr." Blackwood stood up. "Objection. The witness is prone to hysteria." "Overruled," the judge snapped. "Let her speak." Lila looked at her hands. "He did not hit me with his fists," she said, the words tumbling out now. "He was careful about that. He used his open hand, or he would grab my arm, right here." She touched her bicep, where the sleeve covered the marks. "He would squeeze until I cried out, and then he would squeeze harder." The room went deadly quiet. "He would lock me in the pantry," Lila continued, her voice gaining strength. "For hours, in the dark. He told me it was to pray for humility. He told me that I was wicked for wanting to read books or for speaking to the laundry woman. He quoted the Bible while he did it." She looked directly at the preacher in the front row. "He told me that God wanted me to be afraid. He said, 'Wives, submit.' He whispered it in my ear while he had his hands around my throat." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman in the second row put her hand to her mouth. "That night," Lila said, looking straight at Charles now, "he choked me until I saw black spots. He told me that the next time, he wouldn't stop. I waited until he was asleep. I didn't take any money. I didn't take any jewelry. I took my life. That is all I took." "Lies!" Charles stood up, his face reddening. "She is lying. She is sick." "Mr. Ward, sit down," the judge warned. "Mr." Blackwood stepped forward, his face hard. "Mrs. Ward, you claim you were abused, yet you have no witnesses. No doctor ever saw these injuries. Is that correct?" "He didn't let me see doctors," Lila said. "Convenient," Blackwood sneered. "And so, in your fear, you ran straight into the arms of a known gunman, a man with a price on his head? Did you share a bed with this man, Mrs. Ward?" The question hung in the air like smoke. It was the trap. If she admitted it, she was a whore. If she denied it, she was a liar. Lila looked at Cole. She remembered the heat of the line shack. She remembered his gentleness. She remembered the way he had asked, "Not taken." "Yes," Lila said clearly. The crowd erupted. "Adulteress!" a man shouted. "Shame!" Lila did not look down. She raised her chin. "I shared his bed," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "And for the first time in 5 years, I was not afraid. He never raised his hand to me. He never quoted scripture while he hurt me. He treated me like a person, not a piece of property, not a dog to be kicked." "She is possessed!" Charles roared. He slammed her hands onto the table, overturning a pitcher of water. The glass shattered. "She is filled with a devil!" Charles screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Lila. "You ungrateful, wicked woman! After everything I gave you, I pulled you out of the dirt. I gave you a name!" The mask was gone. The calm, pious deacon had vanished. In his place was a man with a face twisted by a rage so pure and icy it terrified the room. His eyes were bulging, the veins in his neck standing out like cords. "I should have broken your neck!" Charles shouted, lunging toward the witness stand. "I should have finished it!" Sheriff Hatcher and Deputy Klein were on him in a second. They grabbed Charles by the arms, wrestling him back. Charles fought them, snarling, spitting, his dignity completely forgotten in the face of his loss of control. The townspeople stared. They had seen Charles Ward pray. They had seen him donate money. They had never seen this. "Order!" Judge Miller hammered the gavel so hard the handle cracked. "Order in this court! Sheriff, restrain that man!" Outside, the sky had turned a bruise-colored purple. The wind, which had been picking up all morning, slammed into the side of the hall with a force that rattled the window panes in their frames. Thunder cracked, a sound like a cannon shot, right over the roof. "We will take a recess!" the judge shouted over the noise of the wind and the crowd. 30 minutes to cool heads. Sheriff, keep the prisoner secure. Mr. Ward, If you speak one more word, I will hold you in contempt." The judge swept out of the room. The hall dissolved into chaos. The townsfolk broke into frantic, whispered arguments. "Did you see his face?" a woman whispered, clutching her shawl. "He looked like he wanted to kill her. She admitted to adultery," a man argued back. "A woman who lies with another man cannot be trusted." "But he said he should have broken her neck," another pointed out. "A righteous man does not say that." In the confusion, Deputy Klein grabbed Cole by the arm. "Back to the holding cell. Tanner, move it!" He dragged Cole toward the back door that led to the jail. Cole looked back over his shoulder, searching for Lila. She was standing near the front, looking shaken and small. Charles was being led toward the side exit by his lawyer, who looked pale and shaken by his client's outburst. "Lila!" Cole shouted. "Stay with the sheriff!" But the noise of the room swallowed his voice. Lila stood alone for a moment. The women, Esther, Ruby, and Bessie, were trying to push through the crowd to get to her, but the press of bodies was too thick. "Mrs. Ward," a voice said. It was not the sheriff. It was one of the men Charles had brought with him, a ranch hand with a hard face. "Judge wants you in the vestry, separate from the crowd." Lila hesitated. "Where's the sheriff?" "He is dealing with your husband," the man said, taking her elbow. "Come on, it is safer out of this mob." He steered her not toward the vestry, but toward the side door that opened into the alley between the hall and the general store. Lila stepped out into the air. It was electric with the storm. The wind whipped her hair across her face. Dust hissed against the brick walls, stinging her skin. The sky was almost black, though it was only early afternoon. "This isn't the vestry," Lila said, pulling back. "No," the man said. "It isn't." A wagon was waiting at the mouth of the alley, and standing beside it, breathing hard, adjusting his cuffs, was Charles. The ranch hand shoved Lila forward. She stumbled, catching herself on the rough brick wall. Charles looked at her. The rage was gone, replaced by a terrifying, icy purpose. "You embarrassed me, Lila," he said. His voice was calm again, which was worse than the shouting. "You made a scene. I told the truth," Lila said, backing away. "You told a story," Charles said. "And now the story is over. Get in the wagon." "No," Lila said. "The judge." "The judge is an old fool," Charles said. "We are going home. I have a doctor in Denver who specializes in women with your condition. A few months in his care, and you won't remember any of this. You won't remember him." He reached for her. "No!" Lila screamed. She turned to run, but the alley was blocked by the ranch hand. Charles grabbed her wrist. His grip was the one she remembered, iron hard, pinching the nerve. He yanked her toward him. "You belong to me," he hissed. "God gave you to me." Inside the jailhouse holding area, Cole was pacing like a caged tiger. The door to the alley was slightly ajar to let in air, guarded by Deputy Klein, who was busy lighting a cigarette and watching the storm. Through the crack in the door, Cole heard it. A scream. "No!" He looked through the gap. He saw the alley. He saw the black wagon. He saw Charles Ward gripping Lila's wrist, dragging her through the mud. Something snapped in Cole's chest. It was the last thread of restraint, the last piece of the man who tried to play by the rules. "Hey!" Deputy Klein turned as Cole moved. Cole didn't stop. He was cuffed, his hands bound in front of him with heavy iron links. He used them as a weapon. He swung his arms up, catching the deputy under the chin with the heavy chain. Klein's head snapped back. He went down hard, the cigarette flying from his mouth. Cole didn't wait to see if he was unconscious. He kicked the door open and ran into the storm. The rain began then, a sudden, torrential downpour that turned the dust to slick red mud in seconds. "Charles!" Cole roared. Charles spun around. He saw the man in the duster, chain swinging, charging down the alley like a bull. "Get him!" Charles shouted to his hired man. The ranch hand reached for his gun, but he was slow, and the rain made his grip slick. Cole didn't slow down. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the man, sending him sprawling into the mud. Cole kept moving. His eyes were locked on Charles. Charles let go of Lila. He reached into his coat pocket. "Cole, he has a gun!" Lila screamed. She scrambled back, slipping in the mud, pressing herself against the wet brick wall. Charles pulled out a small, nickel-plated revolver. It was a gentleman's gun, a hideout weapon. He raised it. Cole was 10 feet away. He couldn't stop. He couldn't dodge. He did the only thing he could do. He threw himself forward, diving through the air. Thunder cracked simultaneously with the gunshot. Lila didn't know who had been hit. She saw the flash of the muzzle. She saw Cole collide with Charles, the momentum carrying them both backward. They hit the mud in a tangle of limbs and black cloth. Charles was screaming, a high, panicked sound. Cole was silent, a grim force of nature. They rolled in the muck. Charles tried to bring the gun around. Cole, his hands still bound, brought his fists down in a double-handed hammer blow. The chain smashed into Charles's forearm. The gun flew from Charles's hand, skittering across the wet stones. But Charles fought with the strength of a madman. He clawed at Cole's face, his fingernails digging into the scar. He kicked and thrashed. "I will kill you!" Charles shrieked. "I will kill you both!" He managed to get a hand around Cole's throat, squeezing. Cole gasped, his face turning red. He couldn't break the grip with his bound hands. Lila saw the gun lying in the mud. She moved. She crawled on her hands and knees, the rain plastering her hair to her face. She reached for the weapon. But before she could touch it, the struggle in the center of the alley shifted violently. Charles had released Cole's throat and was scrambling for the gun himself. He lunged, his fingers closing around the pearl handle. Cole saw it. He rolled, bringing his knees up, and kicked Charles in the chest. Charles flew back. He landed hard on his back, but he held onto the gun. He raised it, aiming directly at Cole's chest. "Die!" Charles hissed. Cole was on his knees. He couldn't move fast enough. Lila screamed. Cole threw himself sideways just as Charles pulled the trigger. The gun didn't fire. A misfire? The rain? No. Charles pulled the trigger again. Click. Cole didn't wait for a third try. He lunged. He landed on top of Charles, his heavy boots finding purchase in the mud. He pinned Charles's gun hand to the ground with his knee. Charles bucked, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning terror. He looked at Cole, and for the first time, he didn't see a drifter he could crush. He saw his own death. Cole raised his bound hands high above his head. The iron cuffs caught the lightning flash. He didn't bring them down on Charles's head. He hesitated. The killing in Texas, the years of running. He didn't want to be a murderer again. In that second of hesitation, Charles twisted. He pulled a second weapon, a knife from his boot. He slashed upward. The blade caught Cole in the side, slicing through the duster and into flesh. Cole grunted, flinching back. Charles scrambled up, knife in hand, lunging for Lila. If he couldn't have her, no one would. "No!" Cole roared. He tackled Charles from behind. They hit the wall of the general store. The impact was bone-shattering. The knife! Where was the knife? They slid down the wall together. Cole pulled back, gasping, clutching his side. Charles stood there for a second. He looked surprised. He looked down. The knife was buried in his own chest, just below the ribs. In the collision, the blade had turned. Charles looked at Lila. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to quote one last scripture, perhaps to curse her, but only a bubble of blood escaped his lips. He crumpled. He fell face forward into the red mud, his pristine black suit soaking up the filth of the alley. The rain poured down, washing the blood into the ruts. Cole leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting in the mud. He pressed his cuffed hands against his bleeding side. Lila scrambled over to him. "Cole! Cole! I am all right," he gasped, though his face was gray. "It is just a cut, not deep." Sss, Lila touched his face, wiping the mud and blood from his cheek. She was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. She looked at Charles. He wasn't moving. The rain beat against his back. "Is he?" "He is gone," Cole said. His voice was empty. "It is over." The sheriff, Deputy Klein, and half the town came running around the corner. They stopped dead at the mouth of the alley. They saw the wagon. They saw the unconscious ranch hand. They saw the body of the wealthy, pious Charles Ward lying dead in the muck. And they saw the runaway wife holding the bleeding outlaw in her arms, shielding him with her body as if she dared them to try and take him. "Holy Mother of God," Sheriff Hatcher whispered. The chaos that followed was a blur of shouting and confusion. "He murdered him!" The lawyer, Blackwood, shrieked, pointing at Cole. "I saw it. He attacked him. He had a knife," Lila screamed back, standing between Cole and the deputies. "Charles tried to kill me. Look at the knife." The sheriff knelt by the body. He turned Charles over. The handle of the knife protruded from his chest. "It is his own knife," Hatcher muttered. "I saw it in his boot when he came into town." "He fell on it," Cole rasped. "We hit the wall." "Arrest him," Blackwood demanded. "Shut up," Hatcher roared. He looked at the scene. He looked at the bruises on Lila's arm, fresh ones from where Charles had grabbed her, turning purple in the rain. He looked at the gun in the mud. "Get the doc," Hatcher ordered his deputy. "Patch Tanner up. Put him back in the cell, but leave the door open. I want a guard, but nobody touches him. You hear me?" The storm raged for another hour, scrubbing the town of Red Hollow raw. It washed the dust from the roofs and the pretenses from the people. By evening, the mood in the town had shifted. The spectacle of Charles's rage in the courtroom had been the first crack. The sight of him dead in an alley, weapon in hand, trying to abduct his wife, shattered the image forever. The inquiry into the shooting was held 2 days later. It was a quieter affair. There were no crowds, just the judge, the sheriff, Lila, Cole, and a few witnesses. Esther testified that she saw Charles drag Lila into the alley. The deputy admitted Cole had broken out only after seeing Lila in danger. The coroner confirmed the knife wound was consistent with a struggle, not an execution. Judge Miller looked at the paperwork. He looked at Lila, who sat next to Cole. She was wearing a black dress borrowed from Mrs. Gable, but she did not look like a grieving widow. She looked like a survivor. "The court finds," Miller said, rubbing his eyes, "that the deceased, Charles Ward, initiated a violent confrontation with the intent to abduct Mrs. Ward. We find that Cole Tanner acted in defense of another. The death of Charles Ward is ruled accidental during the commission of a felony." He looked at Cole. "Mr. Tanner, you assaulted a deputy. You broke out of custody. You are a troublemaker." "Yes, sir," Cole said. "But," the judge continued, "it seems you are the only reason Mrs. Ward is not currently being transported against her will. I am sentencing you to time served. Get out of my town." The gavel came down. Lila let out a breath that sounded like a sob. Cole reached out and took her hand. His cuffs were gone. They walked out of the hall into the sunlight. The air was crisp and clean after the storm. People stopped and watched them pass. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. There was no hero's welcome. Cole had killed a man, accidental or not. Lila was a widow who had taken a lover before her husband was cold. They were free, but they were marked. The scandal would follow them. The whispers would never fully stop. That is the woman who ran. That is the man who killed for her. Lila stopped on the boardwalk. She looked at Cole. His side was bandaged, and he moved stiffly. The scar on his jaw was stark in the light. "You are free," she said. "We are free," he corrected. He looked at the open plain stretching out to the west. "Where do we go?" Lila looked at the horizon. She didn't see emptiness anymore. She saw space. "West," she said. "Further west, where nobody knows the name Ward." "West is hard country," Cole said. "I know," Lila said. She took his arm, feeling the muscle beneath the sleeve. "I'm not afraid of hard work. Cole, I'm only afraid of cages." They walked toward the livery stable to get the horse. They walked side by side, leaving a trail of gossip and blood behind them, crossing toward a future that promised nothing but what they could build with their own 2 hands. The dust of Red Hollow did not settle easily. Even after the judge had banged his gavel and the coroner had carted Charles Ward's body away to be shipped back to Bitter Creek in a pine box, the town vibrated with a nervous, electric tension. The storm had washed the blood from the alley, but it had not washed the memory from the minds of the people. Lila and Cole were free in the eyes of the law, but they were prisoners of the town's collective stare. When they walked down the boardwalk, conversation stopped. Women pulled their skirts aside as if Lila carried a contagion. Men touched their hat brims to Cole, but their eyes were wary, calculating the speed of his hands, measuring the man who had killed a wealthy rancher with a knife to the chest. They were a curiosity, a scandal, a walking reminder that the polite veneer of civilization was thin and easily broken. 3 days after the verdict, Cole stood in the small room at the boarding house. He was packing his saddlebags. His movements were slow, methodical, and heavy. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, mending a tear in her apron. She watched him, the needle still in her hand. "You are packing?" she said. Cole did not look at her. He buckled the leather strap on the bag. "We are leaving then?" "Lila," Cole said. He turned to face her. The bandage on his side was clean, but he moved with a stiffness that spoke of pain. "I am leaving." Lila set the apron down. The room went very quiet. "You are leaving me?" "I have been thinking," Cole said. He rubbed a hand over his face, looking suddenly very tired. "You are a widow now, a legal widow. You have Charles's name, but you don't have to keep it. You could go back east, or you could go to Cheyenne. You could be a teacher, like you wanted. You could find a man who doesn't have a trail of blood behind him. A man the town would tip their hats to with respect, not fear." His voice cracked. Just a fracture in the gravel. But Lila heard it. She saw the way his hands clenched at his sides. He was trying to be noble. He was trying to give her the life he thought she deserved, the life Charles had promised but never delivered. Lila stood up. She walked across the small room until she was standing right in front of him. She looked at the scar on his jaw. She looked at the gray eyes that had watched her sleep in a freezing line shack. "I tried a respectable life," Lila said softly. "I tried a man the town approved of. He choked me in the pantry while quoting the Psalms." "Lila, I'm a drifter," Cole argued, though there was desperation in his voice. "I have nothing. I'm a hard road to walk." "I know," Lila said, "but you are the road I chose." She reached out and took his face in her hands. "Do not insult me. Cole Tanner, do not tell me what I should want. I did not cross that icy river to become a school teacher in Cheyenne and wonder for the rest of my life where you were. I crossed it to be with you." Cole closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. "People will talk. They will never stop talking." "Let them talk," Lila whispered. "I am done listening." They left Red Hollow the next morning. They did not sneak out under the cover of darkness. They rode out at high noon. Cole rode the big bay, and Lila rode a sturdy, speckled mare she had bought with her cafe wages. They rode down the main street, heads high, looking neither left nor right. They stopped at the edge of town. Lila had a small pouch tied to her saddle. Inside were the silver dollars Mrs. Chang had given her, the freedom money she had almost spent a dozen times but saved. Added to that were Cole's wages from the livery and the coins Lila had earned scrubbing dishes. It was not a fortune. It was barely a start, but it was theirs. They rode west. They rode past the established ranches, past the fenced grazing lands, out into the country that was still wild and broken. They rode for 5 days until the land turned rocky and the wind smelled of sage and pine resin. They found it near a narrow, twisting creek that ran cold and clear from the mountains. It was a homestead that had been abandoned years ago. The cabin was little more than a shell, logs rotted at the corners, the roof half caved in, the door missing entirely. A stand of stubborn, wind-twisted pines stood guard behind it, offering the only shade for miles. The soil was full of stones. The wind was relentless. It was an ugly, hard patch of earth that nobody else wanted. Cole reined in his horse and looked at it. "It is a wreck," he said. "Roof needs replacing. Corrals are gone. Ground as hard as iron." Lila looked at the chimney. It was still standing, built of river stone. Smoke could rise from that chimney. "It has water," Lila said, "and wood, and nobody can see us from the road." "It will be a fight," Cole warned. "Every day will be a fight just to keep warm and fed." Lila dismounted. She walked up to the empty doorway and turned back to him. "Then we fight," she said. "At least we are fighting for ourselves." They bought the claim from the land office in the next territory town for a handful of dollars. They signed the papers as Mr. and Mrs. Tanner. The clerk didn't look up. To him, they were just two more fools trying to wring a life out of the dust. The first month was a blur of exhaustion. They camped in the shell of the cabin while they worked. Cole felled trees from the ridge, dragging the logs down with the horse. His hands, already calloused, grew hard as wood. He mixed mud and straw to chink the gaps in the walls. He cut shakes for the roof, hammering until his shoulders screamed. Lila worked beside him. She hauled river stones to rebuild the hearth. She cleared the brush from the yard, her hands bleeding and stained with sap. She learned to mix the mud to the right consistency. She learned to swing a hammer. There was no romance in it. They fell into their bedroll at night too tired to speak, smelling of sweat and dirt. Their muscles ached. They ate beans and biscuits cooked over an open fire until the chimney was safe to use. But slowly, the shell became a house. They hung a door made of planks. Cole planed smooth. They built a table. They stuffed a mattress with dried grass and sage. One evening, Cole came in from the yard. He was carrying a scrawny rabbit he had shot. He stopped in the doorway. Lila had found an old jar and filled it with wildflowers, paintbrush, and bluebells. She had set it on the rough table. It was a small thing, a useless thing. Really. But Cole stared at it for a long time. "It looks like a home," he said quietly. "It is a home," Lila said. As summer bled into autumn, Lila began to change. The pale, frightened woman who had flinched at loud noises was gone, burned away by the sun and the wind. Her skin turned a golden brown. Her arms grew wiry and strong. She asked Cole to teach her to shoot again. This time, she wasn't shooting at a tree trunk. They couldn't afford to waste ammunition on practice. She hunted with him. She learned to stalk through the dry grass without making a sound. She learned to hold her breath when a grouse flushed. The first time she brought down a deer, a young buck that would feed them for weeks, she didn't cry. She knelt beside the animal, thanked it, and helped Cole dress it out. Her hands steady as she held the knife. She learned to ride alone. She would take the mare and ride up into the hills to gather berries or check the perimeter of their land. At first, Cole watched her go with anxious eyes, his hand drifting to his gun. "I will be fine," she told him. "I know the way. I have the revolver." "I know," Cole said. "Old habits." "Charles taught me to be helpless," Lila said, tightening the cinch on her saddle. "He told me the world was too big and too scary for a woman. He lied." She mounted the horse and looked down at him. "I am not helpless, Cole, and I am not his anymore." But the past was not so easily discarded. It lived in the dark corners of the cabin and in the silence of the night. Cole still had nightmares. The killing in Texas, the face of the man he had shot, the feel of Charles's knife sliding into his side. He would wake up gasping, his body rigid, his fists clenched and ready to strike. In the old days, alone on the trail, he would have sat up and smoked a cigarette until dawn, letting the shame eat him. Now, he felt a hand on his chest. "Cole," Lila would whisper. "You are here. You are with me." She didn't pull away from his violence. She moved into it. She soothed him with a touch that was firm and grounding. She stroked the hair back from his damp forehead. She hummed a low, wordless tune until his breathing slowed and his fists uncurled. "I'm sorry," he would rasp in the darkness. "I am broken." "You are not broken," Lila would say, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "You are just healing. Scars take time to fade." Their intimacy grew in the quiet spaces between the work. It wasn't just the relief of bodies seeking comfort. It was a language they were inventing together, In the evenings, when the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Cole would sit behind Lila on the edge of the bed. He would take her long, dark hair in his rough hands. "Hold still," he would murmur. He would braid her hair. His fingers, so large and scarred, moved with a surprising, deliberate delicacy. He handled her hair like it was silk, like it was precious. He wove the strands together, tying the end with a strip of leather. Lila would sit with her eyes closed, leaning back against his chest. It was a simple act, but it felt more intimate than anything she had ever known. It was an act of service, an act of care. And afterward, she would take his hands. She would turn them over, tracing the scars on his knuckles, the calluses on his palms. She would kiss the jagged white line on his jaw. "You have good hands," she would tell him. "They have done bad things," he would answer. "They built this house." She would say, "They hold me." Desire, when it came, was sudden and fierce. It was no longer the tentative exploration of Red Hollow. It was a claiming. One night, the wind was particularly brutal, shaking the cabin walls. Lila was already in bed, watching Cole bank the fire. He was shirtless, the firelight playing over the muscles of his back. Lila felt a heat rise in her that had nothing to do with the stove. She remembered the years she had spent dreading the bedroom door opening. She remembered feeling like a vessel to be used and discarded. She sat up. "Cole." He turned. "Yeah, cold?" "No," she said. "Come here." She didn't wait for him to come to her. She reached out and caught the waistband of his trousers. She tugged him toward the bed. Cole looked at her, surprised. He saw the fire in her eyes. He saw the way her lips parted. "Lila," he warned, his voice rough. "I am dirty. I smell like smoke. I don't care," she said. She laughed, a breathless, bold sound. "I want you." She pulled him down. That night, she was not passive. She explored the landscape of his body with the same determination she had used to clear the field. She kissed his throat. She ran her hands over his chest. She guided him. For a moment, Cole hesitated, his old fear of hurting her rising up, but Lila looked at him, her face flushed, her eyes wide and clear. "Look at me," she whispered. "I am not afraid. I am choosing this." And in the silence of their cabin, miles from the nearest soul, they found a freedom that no court could grant. Lila learned that her body was not a trap. It was an instrument of joy. She learned that wanting him, needing him, crying out his name in the dark did not make her wicked. It made her alive. But the world outside the cabin did not disappear. They needed supplies, flour, sugar, ammunition. Once a month, they hitched the mare to the old wagon they had repaired and drove to the town of Granite Peak, a day's ride east. Granite Peak was bigger than Red Hollow. It had a brick bank and a hotel with glass windows. It also had a telegraph office, and news traveled. The first time they walked into the general store, the silence was immediate. The storekeeper, a man named Mr. Abernathy with spectacles and a pinched nose, stopped sorting mail. He looked at Cole. He looked at Lila. "We need 50 pounds of flour," Cole said, placing his hands on the counter. "And coffee." "Mr." Abernathy cleared his throat. He looked at the other customers, 2 women whispering by the fabric bolts. "I can sell you the goods," Abernathy said, his voice loud. "But it is cash only. No credit for transients." Cole's jaw tightened. "We are not transients. We have the claim up on Serpent Creek. We are settlers." "So you say," Abernathy sniffed. "But I heard about the mess in Red Hollow. I heard about the Ward fellow." Lila stepped forward. She placed a hand on Cole's arm to stop him from speaking. She looked Abernathy in the eye. "Mr. Ward is dead," she said calmly. "And we have cash." She counted out the coins on the counter. Every slap of silver against the wood was a defiance. "Give us the flour," she said. Abernathy took the money, muttering under his breath. He shoved the sack across the counter without looking at them. When they walked out, Lila held her head high, but Cole was shaking with suppressed rage. I should have pulled him over that counter, Cole growled as they loaded the wagon. Then you would be in jail, Lila said, lifting a heavy sack of beans. And I would be alone. His opinion doesn't feed us. Cole, this flour does. But there were others. On the road back, a wheel on their wagon cracked. It was a bad break, the wood splintering under the load. They were miles from home, the sun sinking fast. A wagon approached from the other direction. It was driven by a black man with broad shoulders and a graying beard. He pulled his team up as he saw them stranded. Trouble? The man asked. His voice was deep and rumbling. Cole looked up, wiping grease from his hands. Wheel's done for. Gotta brace it to limp home. The man nodded. He climbed down. He didn't ask their names. He didn't ask about the gossip. He looked at the wheel, then went to his own wagon and pulled out a piece of hardwood and some sturdy rope. I am Isaac, he said. Cole, this is my wife. Lila. Isaac nodded to Lila, tipping his hat with genuine respect. Ma'am? He helped Cole brace the wheel. He worked side by side with him in the dust, their hands moving in rhythm. When they were finished, Cole offered him $1. Isaac shook his head. Keep it. You will need it for a new rim. He looked at them, really looked at them. He saw the way they stood close together, the way the world looked at them, and the way they looked back. I had a wife once, Isaac said softly. We came out here from Missouri after the war. Folks didn't much like us having a place of our own, but we had it. That is what matters. You hold on to your patch of dirt. He climbed back onto his wagon. You hold on tight. There were others, too. A traveling preacher who stopped by their cabin for water and stayed for dinner. He didn't ask for a marriage certificate. He blessed their food and told them that God looked at the heart, not the law books. There was a Lakota couple who camped near the creek in the spring. The woman showed Lila which roots were good to eat and which would make you sick. They traded dried venison for coffee. They didn't care about Charles Ward. They cared that Cole and Lila respected the land and didn't fence off the water. Seasons cycled. The first winter was brutal. The creek froze solid. The wind piled snow in drifts as high as the roof. They huddled by the fire, rationing their food, sleeping fully clothed under every blanket they owned. Spring came with mud, miles of it. But it also came with green shoots pushing up through the black earth. Lila planted a garden. Potatoes, turnips, stubborn beans. Summer brought heat that baked the ground until it cracked. A drought in July withered half the garden. The wolves took the foal their mare had birthed. One evening in late August, the heat finally broke. A cooling wind swept down from the mountains. Lila walked down to the creek. The water was low, trickling over the stones. She stood on the bank, watching the water flow. It reminded her of that night. The terror, the cold, the choice. She felt a presence behind her. She didn't flinch. She knew the sound of his boots. Cole stepped up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on the top of her head. The sky was turning gold and purple, the clouds catching the last fire of the sun. Thinking? Cole asked. Remembering, Lila said. She leaned into him. Sometimes, she whispered. I still hear him. Charles. In the quiet, he tells me I am nothing. He tells me I will fail. He tells me I am dirty. Cole's arms tightened. He held her as if he could physically shield her from the ghost. He is dead. Lila, Cole said. He is in the ground. And look at you. You are standing on your own land. You grew food from rocks. You survived the winter. You are loved. He turned her around to face him. He looked at her face, lined now by the sun, but open and strong. Every day you get up, Cole said fiercely. Every day you plant a seed, or bake bread, or laugh. You prove him wrong. You are winning. Lila, every single day, you are beating him. Lila looked at him. She saw the truth in his eyes. She saw the reflection of the woman he saw, not a victim, but a partner, a survivor. I was thinking, Lila said slowly, about the house. It is small, but we could add a room on the back. A room? Cole raised an eyebrow. For what? For others, Lila said. There are other women. Cole, women like I was. Women running from their own rivers. They need a place to land. A place where nobody asks questions, where nobody quotes scripture while they hurt them. Cole looked at her. He looked at the rough cabin they had built. He thought of the women who had helped Lila in Red Hollow. He thought of the girl in the saloon in Texas he hadn't been able to save. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask how they would afford it. We will need more timber, he said. I can start cutting tomorrow. Lila smiled. It was a smile that reached her eyes, bright and unshadowed. Yes, tomorrow. The story ends on a night in November. The wind is howling outside, a familiar beast scratching at the door, but the walls are thick and the chinking holds inside. The firelight flickers warm and gold. A pot of stew bubbles on the stove. The cabin is clean, smelled of pine and sage. Lila and Cole lie together on the bed. The day's work is done. Cole is tired, his body heavy with the good ache of labor. Lila is tracing the lines of his hand with her fingertip, the calluses, the scars, the lifeline. We will need to patch the roof before the snow really hits, Cole murmurs, his eyes half closed. And chop more wood, Lila adds. Maybe next spring, Cole says quietly. We can buy a few head of cattle, start a herd. Maybe, Lila says, and maybe a milk cow. They talk of the future. Not a grand future of wealth or ease, but a future of seasons, a future of survival, a future where they might, one day, hear the sound of a child laughing in this room. Lila rests her head on his chest. She listens to his heart. It beats steady and strong. The West outside is harsh. It is unforgiving. It will try to freeze them, starve them, and break them. The town will whisper. The memories will haunt, but they are here. They are together. Lila closes her eyes. She is not afraid of the dark anymore. She is not afraid of the silence. She remembers the river. She remembers the hand reaching down. She remembers the choice. And she knows, with a certainty that sits in her bones like iron, that she would cross it again, 1,000 times. She presses a kiss to Cole's chest. I am home, she whispers. You are home, he answers. The fire burns low, casting their shadows on the wall, merging them into one. Outside, the wind blows, but it cannot touch them. They have crossed over, and they will keep crossing, toward each other, no matter the cost. Thank you for journeying with me through this story of Lila and Cole. It has been a pleasure to walk the dusty streets of Red Hollow and the high plains of Wyoming with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on the story. Did Lila and Cole's ending resonate with you? If you enjoyed this tale of the American West, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of survival, love, and the human spirit on the frontier. Until next time, keep your fire burning bright.